I want to try something different today. I want to talk about my own research. I'm going to discuss a paper I wrote along with Dr. Jamie Weathers from Western Michigan University and Dr. Darshak Patel of the University of Kentucky. The paper looks at the racial financial literacy gap. The racial wealth gap in the United States is widening. Brookings recently reported that based on 2016 data, the average net worth of a white household is $171,000 compared to only $17,000 for black households. There is obviously a problem with this economic reality. To make matters worse, between 2010 and 2013, the net worth of white households grew from 10 times that of black households to 13 times. The gap is growing. Economists are working hard to explain why the gap exists, and they're trying to find ways to help narrow that gap. I've been trying to understand why this gap exists, and one possible explanation that actually not many have looked at has been differences in financial literacy across racial groups. Are there differences because people have different level of financial literacy or knowledge? Why do these differences exist? Does providing financial literacy education work? How can we provide people with better financial knowledge so they can live better financial lives? These are all questions that I ask, and that's how I spent my time on my research. Within the field of financial literacy, there are two oppositional viewpoints that try to explain the racial differences in financial literacy. Some researchers say increased financial literacy leads to increased wealth. If you understand the financial world better, even just the basics, the barriers to investing and other financial practices will be reduced. The other view states that poor economic choices and financial decisions are not attributed to lack of financial literacy, but rather due to the socioeconomic and political structures of this country. In our paper, Racial Differences in the Returns of Financial Literacy Education, published in the Journal of Consumer Affairs, we shed light on this issue by first asking if financial literacy differs by race, and if it does, whether providing financial literacy education helps reduce the racial financial literacy gap. So we're interested in seeing if there's a connection between financial literacy education, and race. Our paper uses the 2015 sample of the National Financial Capability Study to study financial literacy gaps. We find that the average financial literacy score on a financial test is actually 59%. On average, people don't know much about finances. We also find that only 27% of people have actually participated in a financial literacy education program. If financial education actually works, then we need to increase access to financial literacy education. We also find that a racial financial literacy gap does exist. Being white is associated with having a financial literacy score of 63% compared to 51% for minorities. The gap in racial financial literacy exists. The good news, though, for those of us that are working financial literacy education, is that those that have participated in financial literacy education have higher financial literacy scores. On average, 5 percentage points higher. Another area of concern that we find in our research is that we compare across racial groups, we find that whites benefit more from financial literacy education than do minorities. A white person participating in financial literacy education will score 2 percentage points higher than a minority. So the gains to financial literacy education exist, but the benefits are higher for white participants. While our research just peels a layer off of this complex problem, we need to recognize that more research needs to be done to identify the why. Our paper does not look at quality of financial literacy education. The reality is that the access to financial literacy education is not equally distributed, and when it is available, the resources provided towards it vary by school level. My next area of research is trying to connect the resources schools have to teach financial literacy education and how that relates to the racial financial literacy gap. This might not be a knowledge issue, it might be an access to resources issue. If you're interested in knowing more, reach out or continue to follow my research journey here. This episode is brought to you by the EI District, an entrepreneurship consulting firm with a mission to increase access to entrepreneurship. The EI District provides support for startups, educational resources, and helps connect entrepreneurs with a network of support. Learn more about the EI District by visiting eidistrict.com. See you next week on Coffee with Dr. A.